Chapter 1. Blood smells like rusted iron and crushed winter pine. Odette learned this harsh truth long before the screaming started. Survival for the blind is a matter of reading the air, of anticipating the strike before it lands. Tonight, the crisp atmosphere of the winter festival shattered into jagged pieces. To live without sight is to put absolute trust in the dark. But the dark is invariably full of monsters, and trust is often just a prelude to slaughter. Steel chimed violently against steel. A sickening wet thud echoed right near her feet. Odette stumbled backward, her breath leaving her lungs in a terrified rush. Her thin shoes slipped on the uneven cobblestones. The ground was slick. It was unnervingly warm. It was blood. Panic seized her throat like a vice. The joyous festival music had morphed into a horrific symphony of death. Assassins had breached the great hall of Veneborg. The scent of ozone, fear, and violent aggression rolled over her in suffocating waves. She fell hard against the icy ground. Her knees scraped against something sharp and unyielding. Fragmented stone, or perhaps bone. Footsteps thundered toward her. They were leaden, armored, and entirely lethal. The unmistakable hiss of a blade slicing through freezing air reached her ears. It was coming straight for her neck. Odette threw her trembling hands up. It was a desperate, useless shield against an inevitable execution. She braced for the final agonizing cut. But the blade never hit. Instead, a colossal force collided with the space directly in front of her. The impact rattled her teeth in her skull. A beastly roar shook the ancient stone foundations of the hall. Odette's flailing hands sought purchase in the chaos. She expected to find the cold steel of armor or the rough texture of a stone pillar. She found skin. Her bare, freezing palm slapped against a face. A harsh, stubbled jawline, sharply carved cheekbones, blistering, radiant heat. Time stopped. The peripheral chaos around them faded into a vacuum of profound silence. King Torsten had not felt a single physical sensation in 3 centuries. His ancient curse, the Iron Stone, had stripped him of warmth, of pain, of the very concept of a gentle touch. He was an apex predator trapped in a perpetually frozen void, ruling his kingdom with brutal, unfeeling efficiency. Until this exact second, the fragile girl's hands pressed against his face, and fire exploded through his stagnant veins. It was blinding. It was agonizingly sweet. For the first time in hundreds of years, his dead heart kicked against his formidable ribs. 1 beat, 2 beats, a torrential, deafening rhythm. His wolf clawed at the confines of his mind, entirely unhinged by the sudden violent sensory overload. Mate, mine. Odette gasped, instinctively trying to pull her hands away. The heat radiating from the imposing man was terrifying. He felt like a living furnace, but inescapable hands gripped her delicate wrists. He held her palms flush against his cheeks, refusing to let her retreat. He inhaled sharply, his chest expanding against hers. She smelled of midnight rain and crushed lavender. "Do not move," a voice rumbled. It sounded like grinding tectonic plates. Odette trembled violently. The murderous intent radiating from his imposing frame was suffocating. Yet, beneath the feral dominance, she heard something else. Thump, thump, thump. His heart was racing. It beat with a frantic, desperate cadence against her chest. The assassin recovered from the initial collision. The enemy lunged forward, seeking a fatal opening. Torsten did not even flinch. He did not release Odette's hands. He simply turned his broad, towering back to the attacker. Cold steel sank deep into Torsten's shoulder, tearing through muscle and sinew. Odette screamed as the sharp scent of fresh blood hit her nose. "You are hurt," Torsten completely ignored the blade lodged in his flesh. The pain was secondary. The pain was glorious, because it meant he could finally feel. He could feel the sting of the steel, and more importantly, he could feel her. He pulled the blind servant girl flush against his chest, crushing her to his unyielding torso. His towering frame shielded her entirely from the surrounding slaughter. His glowing amber eyes locked onto the assassin. The ambient temperature in the great hall seemed to plummet to absolute zero. If any man dares touch a single hair on this girl's head, Torsten snarled, his voice a demonic, blood-chilling promise, I will bathe this continent in the blood of your entire lineage. The sheer force of his alpha command crushed the remaining air from Odette's lungs. The world spun into dizzying, chaotic darkness. Her knees gave out completely. She surrendered to the black void, wrapped safely in the overwhelming scent of winter pine and royal blood. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like, subscribe, and leave a comment. It really motivates me to keep writing better stories for you. Chapter 2. Odette drifted upward through layers of plush velvet and silken sheets. She had never felt such decadent fabrics in her life. Her fingers grazed the mattress. It was impossibly soft, but the lingering scent of ozone, winter pine, and fresh blood triggered a violent rush of memories. The assassins, the slaughter, the terrifying Alpha King. She scrambled backward against the towering headboard. Her breath hitched. She was entirely blind, but her hearing was razor-sharp. Two voices rumbled nearby. You have been staring at her for a solid hour, a voice remarked. It belonged to the beta, Ronan. His tone carried a careful mixture of amusement and deep concern. She is a blind maid, Torsten. You know the ancient law. Vanborg law was absolute and cruel. Any commoner who dared touch the sovereign faced immediate amputation. Both hands. Odette squeezed her eyes shut. Panic clawed brutally at her throat. She opened her mouth to plead, but only a fractured, breathless wheeze escaped. She was entirely mute. She had not spoken a single word in a decade. A low, resonant growl vibrated through the grand chamber. The law is irrelevant. Torsten's voice was leaden and cold. The moment he had released her to the royal healers, his ancient curse had slammed back into place. The agonizing, suffocating numbness had reclaimed his veins. He was freezing from the inside out. He needed that blistering heat again. He craved the spark of her soul. He needed her. Footsteps approached the bed. They were deliberate and imposing. Odette shrank into the furthest corner, trembling violently under the fine linens. Do not cower, Torsten commanded. His tone was surprisingly gentle. The paradox of his lethal reputation and this soft request confused her completely. The mattress dipped under his colossal weight. Odette pulled her knees to her chest. She was trapped. Give me your hands, he urged. She shook her head wildly. She knew the penalty. The executioner's block awaited her. Torsten did not wait for permission. He reached out and captured her delicate wrists. A jolt of pure, unadulterated fire shot up his arms. The icy curse shattered instantly. He inhaled a sharp, desperate breath. He felt the terrifying vulnerability of being truly alive. He guided her trembling palms flat against his bare, scarred chest. The heat radiating from his skin was intoxicating. Feel this, he whispered, his voice dark and incredibly husky. Feel what you have done to me. Odette gasped softly. Beneath her sensitive fingertips, the Alpha King's heart hammered against his ribs. It was a frantic, deafening rhythm. She traced the smooth ridge of his fresh, bandaged wound, a permanent testament to the blade he took for her. The romantic tension pulled tight between them, thick and undeniable. She was terrified of him, yet completely mesmerized by the frantic drumming of his life force. Suddenly, violent pounding echoed from the corridor. The heavy oak doors burst open with a resounding crash. "My king?" an elderly, grating voice shouted. "The council demands justice. Hand over the servant. The law demands her hands." The intimate spell broke instantly. Torsten's amber eyes flared with lethal, unrestrained fury. His wolf surged to the surface, demanding blood. He released Odette and moved with supernatural speed. The metallic scrape of a broadsword being drawn filled the tense room. Odette flinched, hearing a collective, terrified gasp from the intruders. Torsten pressed the razor-sharp edge of his blade directly against the head elder's throat. A single drop of blood welled at the contact point. "From this moment forward, she is my absolute prohibition," Torsten declared. His voice was a demonic, unyielding promise. "Anyone who steps into this room, I will bathe in their blood." Chapter 3. Odette became a permanent fixture in the royal chambers. Torsten demanded her constant presence. He commanded it with an intensity that brooked no argument. Day and night, she remained within arm's reach of the towering Alpha. The proximity was exquisite torture for them both. Accidental touches became a dangerous game. When she blindly guided a goblet to his lips, her fingertips brushed his jaw. Fire immediately raced through his veins. When she replaced the linen bandages on his healing shoulder, her soft breath fanned across his collarbone. His chest would rumble with a suppressed, feral growl. The mate bond wove between them like a tightening wire. Torsten craved her heat with a terrifying desperation. Yet, Odette remained trapped in a silent prison of fear and awe. Then came the night of the full hunter's moon. Luminous silver beams sliced through the towering glass windows. The chamber temperature plummeted. Odette shivered, pulling her woolen shawl tighter. Suddenly, a fractured groan echoed near the hearth. Odette froze. She formed his name in her mind, though her lips remained parted in mute terror. A leaden thud shook the floorboards. Torsten had collapsed. The ancient iron-stone curse was violently rebelling against the fiery mate bond. It refused to relinquish its icy grip on his soul. Odette scrambled across the cold stone floor. Her hands found his broad shoulders. He was convulsing. His skin felt like glacial ice. He coughed violently. A thick, metallic stench hit her senses. It was black, corrupted blood spilling past his lips, staining the fine carpets. He was dying. The curse was tearing his internal organs apart to kill the foreign warmth she had introduced. Pure, unadulterated terror seized her heart. Odette did not think. She acted entirely on instinct. She threw her arms around his colossal frame. She pulled his head against her chest, burying her face in his dark hair. She held him with desperate, crushing force, refusing to let the cold take him. Instantly, the room vanished in a blinding eruption of light. A radiant, ethereal, silver aura exploded from Odette's fragile body. It illuminated the darkest corners of the grand chamber. The sheer magical pressure pushed the shadows away. And then, the impossible happened. After a decade of absolute silence, Odette opened her mouth. Words poured from her lips. They were not ordinary words. It was an ancient, melodic incantation, vibrating with celestial power. Her voice sounded like wind chimes in a winter storm. It was beautiful and utterly terrifying. Torsten gasped for air. The black blood stopped flowing. The excruciating agony in his chest evaporated, replaced by a soothing, divine warmth. He stared up at the glowing, blind girl holding him. She was no ordinary human servant. She was a creature of myth. The silver light slowly faded into a soft, dying ember. Odette slumped forward, entirely drained. Before Torsten could catch her, the chamber doors flew open. Ronan sprinted into the room. His face was completely drained of color. He clutched a crumbling ancient parchment tightly in his fist. "Torsten, get away from her," the beta shouted, his voice cracking with unprecedented panic. Torsten pulled Odette protectively against his chest, baring his teeth. "Watch your tone, Ronan." "You do not understand," Ronan yelled, waving the brittle scroll frantically. "I found the archives. She is a Moon-Seer. She is the last descendant of the heretic witches who forged the Ironstone curse." Ronan stopped, his chest heaving as he stared at the unconscious girl in the king's arms. "Loving her means your absolute death, Torsten. She is meant to kill you." Chapter 4. Torsten did not hesitate. He did not care about ancient prophecies or heretic witches. The council's furious demands echoed through the heavy oak doors, but they meant absolutely nothing to him. "Ronan, leave us," Torsten commanded. His voice was a lethal, vibrating threat that left no room for debate. "Torsten, they will execute her," his beta pleaded, his face pale with terror. "The entire kingdom will demand her blood." "Then let them burn," the Alpha King snarled. He scooped Odette into his powerful arms as if she weighed nothing. The sudden motion stole the breath from her lungs. She clung to his broad shoulders, burying her face in the crook of his neck. The intoxicating scent of winter pine and raw, untamed power enveloped her completely. He moved with supernatural speed, bypassing the royal guards and carrying her deep into the hidden bowels of the castle. They descended into the ancient, forgotten catacombs beneath Vanneborg. The air down here was damp and tasted of old earth and secrets. Torsten finally set her down on a soft, luxurious fur pelt in a secluded, subterranean chamber. The silence of the underground sanctuary was profound. It amplified the frantic racing rhythm of Odette's heartbeat. She pulled her knees to her chest, trembling violently in the suffocating darkness. The overwhelming reality of her true identity crashed down upon her fragile shoulders. "They want to kill me," she whispered. A broken sob tore through her throat. "My ancestors cursed you. I am the reason you suffered for 3 centuries. Tears spilled from her unseeing eyes, carving hot tracks down her pale cheeks. The crushing weight of guilt threatened to swallow her whole. She was a Moon-Seer, the sworn enemy of his kind. He should despise her. He should throw her to the merciless council to appease his furious people. Instead, a blistering, radiant heat enveloped her shivering frame. Torsten knelt on the cold stone floor directly in front of her. "Do not weep for the past," he rumbled, his voice incredibly husky. His large calloused hands gently framed her delicate face. The contrast between his lethal strength and this exquisite tenderness made her breath hitch. He leaned forward, his imposing presence entirely focused on her. His thumbs brushed the fresh tears from her cheeks. "My blindness," Odette confessed, her voice barely a fractured breath. "It is not a birth defect. King Vigo did this to me." Torsten went completely rigid. A menacing feral growl vibrated deep within his chest. The ambient temperature in the catacombs seemed to plummet, a stark reaction to his rising murderous intent. "When I was 7 years old, Vigo's dark forces raided my village," she continued, trembling at the horrific memory. "He recognized my bloodline. He poured a toxic alchemy into my eyes to permanently seal my magic. He wanted to ensure I could never challenge his dark reign." The Alpha King inhaled a sharp, agonizing breath. The sheer, Unadulterated fury radiating from his imposing frame was palpable, yet his touch remained impossibly gentle, his massive thumbs smoothed over her cheekbones. "He stole my sight," she wept softly. "I am broken, Torsten. I am nothing but a cursed, blind servant." "You are flawless," Torsten declared fiercely. He leaned closer, his warm breath fanning across her tear-stained skin. Slowly, with an aching, profound reverence, he pressed his lips against her closed, sightless eyelids. The kiss was a searing brand of absolute devotion. It sent a jolt of liquid fire straight to her core, melting the residual fear that gripped her heart. "I would gladly endure another 1,000 years of the ironstone curse," he whispered against her skin, his voice thick with raw, unrestrained emotion, "rather than live a single day without your warmth." Odette gasped softly. The romantic tension pulled impossibly tight between them, a heavy, electric charge in the damp air. She reached out blindly, her trembling fingers tangling in his thick, dark hair. He let out a deep, satisfied rumble, leaning fully into her caress. The space between them evaporated, her lips parted, instinctively seeking his blazing heat in the consuming darkness, the feral instinct of the wolf and the delicate vulnerability of the witch collided in a breathtaking surge of mutual longing. Suddenly, a catastrophic explosion rocked the subterranean chamber. The ancient stone walls shuddered violently. Dust and debris rained down upon them in a chaotic deluge. Above ground, the formidable, supposedly impenetrable defenses of Castle Vaneborg were shattering. Torsten sprang to his feet, his broadsword already gleaming in his hand. His amber eyes flared with lethal, unrestrained violence. The tender lover vanished, instantly replaced by the ruthless apex predator. A demonic, amplified voice boomed from the surface, shaking the very foundations of the earth. "Hand over the Moon-Seer, brat," King Vigo roared from the smoldering rubble of the courtyard. "Deliver her to me, or this entire kingdom will burn to ash." Chapter 5. Torsten did not hesitate. His imposing body contorted violently. The sickening sound of elongating bones and tearing muscle echoed off the damp subterranean walls. Odette shrank back, gasping as a wave of blistering heat washed over her freezing skin. Where the Alpha King had stood, a colossal wolf now crouched. His fur blazed like liquid fire in the dim catacombs. A guttural snarl ripped from his colossal chest, shaking the very foundation of the earth. "Guard her with your life, Ronin," the beast commanded through the pack's telepathic link. With a deafening roar, Torsten launched himself upward, crashing through the vaulted ceiling to meet the invading army. Above ground, the courtyard had descended into absolute carnage. Torsten tore through King Vigo's dark forces like a falling meteor. His massive jaws crushed black iron armor. His lethal claws shredded corrupted flesh. He fought with the unhinged savagery of a predator protecting its mate. But something was horribly, fatally wrong. For 3 centuries, the ironstone curse had shielded him from the agony of war. Now, cracked wide open by the fragile heat of a blind girl's touch, that impenetrable invulnerability was entirely gone. A jagged poison blade sliced viciously across his flank. Torsten stumbled, a roar of genuine agony tearing from his throat. Blinding, white-hot pain registered in his brain for the first time in an eternity. Blood, hot and crimson, poured from his side, staining the pristine winter snow. He was bleeding. He was devastatingly vulnerable. Down in the suffocating darkness of the crypt, Odette collapsed to her knees. Ronin stood over her, his broadsword drawn, but the beta could not protect her from the phantom agony tearing through her own fragile body. The new mate bond pulsed wildly. It transmitted every ounce of Torsten's physical suffering directly into her soul. She tasted bitter copper on her tongue. She felt the icy bite of steel against her phantom ribs. Her breath came in short, frantic gasps. "He is dying," she wept, clutching her chest. Her sightless eyes streamed with fresh, hot tears. "Stay down, Odette," Ronan ordered, his voice tight with rising panic. "He commanded me to keep you safe. I will not fail him." But Odette could feel the Alpha King's life force flickering. It felt like a dying candle in a brutal winter storm. Torsten was fighting a losing battle. Vigo's dark magic was too potent, and her mate was bleeding out, crippled by the very love that had saved his frozen soul. To save the only man who had ever treated her as more than a cursed, broken thing, she had to make a ruthless choice. She pushed past the bewildered Beta. She navigated the crumbling stone stairs entirely by the metallic stench of carnage and the fading, frantic pulse of her mate. She emerged into a freezing, ash-choked courtyard. The roaring battle had quieted to a deafening silence, broken only by a sickening, wet crunch. "Pathetic," a cruel voice sneered. The speaker smelled of rotting leaves and sulfur. King Vigo. Odette dropped to the frosted earth. Her frantic fingers searched the sharp debris until they closed around a jagged piece of shattered, stained glass. It sliced her palm, but she welcomed the sudden sting. She stood tall, facing the overwhelming, suffocating darkness. "Stop!" Vigo paused. His dark, corrupted blade hovered mere inches from Torsten's ruined, bleeding throat. Odette did not hesitate. She dragged the glass deep across her palm. Radiant, blinding silver moonlight erupted from her torn flesh. The scent of pure, unadulterated Moon-Seer magic hit the freezing air, intoxicating and ancient. It immediately commanded the attention of every predator in the courtyard. "Release him," Odette commanded. Her voice was utterly devoid of warmth, a glacial breeze cutting through the ash. "I will follow you to hell, Vigo. Just let him live." A cruel, rasping laugh echoed across the ruined stones. Vigo abandoned the fallen Alpha King. He closed the distance in 3 predatory strides. His rotting, freezing hands twisted brutally into Odette's long hair, yanking her head back with merciless force. "A fair trade," Vigo mocked, dragging her effortlessly toward the encroaching shadows. Behind them, drowning in his own blood, Torsten dragged his shattered body across the crimson frost, his amber eyes fixed desperately on her fading silhouette. A feral, agonizing scream tore from his ruined throat, echoing her name into the empty, freezing night. Chapter 6. Ronan pressed steeped yarrow and binding linen to the ruined flank. The Beta was shouting desperate, frantic orders. Torsten heard none of it. He shoved his loyal friend away with a violent, involuntary jerk. Blood poured freely from his side. It stained the pristine furs beneath him a horrific crimson. The physical agony was a dull ache compared to the catastrophic silence in his mind. The mate bond felt stretched to its absolute limit. It was a frayed, vibrating wire humming with Odette's fading terror. He was no longer a cold, calculating monarch. The ancient iron-stone curse had shattered completely. It left behind a raw, bleeding, and entirely unhinged predator. Torsten threw his head back. He let out a guttural, earth-shattering roar. The primal power of the first alphas surged through his violently reshaping bones. He did not need invulnerability when he had absolute, consuming wrath. His muscles expanded, tearing the hasty bandages into useless shreds. He was burning from the inside out with a singular, desperate need. He led his most elite guard across the frozen, unforgiving wastelands. They rode like vengeful phantoms. They reached the towering obsidian gates of Vigo's shadowed fortress, just before the stroke of midnight. Torsten did not wait for siege weapons. He did not issue tactical commands. He slammed his colossal weight against the iron-reinforced timber. The gates splintered instantly. They caved inward under his sheer, love-maddened force. What followed was not a battle. It was a localized apocalypse. Torsten tore through the corrupted ranks like a hurricane of fangs and steel. The stench of decaying flesh and fresh copper choked the damp, freezing air. He severed limbs and crushed throats. He was entirely numb to the dark magic scorching his own skin. His golden eyes burned with catastrophic purpose. Every broken enemy was a step closer to his stolen mate. He tracked her failing heartbeat through the suffocating maze of black stone. He kicked down the towering doors of the subterranean sacrificial chamber. Vigo stood over an obsidian altar. He was chanting in a foul, grating tongue. Torsten moved faster than the human eye could track. He drove his broadsword straight through Vigo's blackened heart. The lethal blade pierced bone and stone alike. The Dark King gasped, collapsing into a pile of rotting, foul-smelling ash. But the victory brought no relief. It tasted like decay in Torsten's mouth. He dropped his blood-soaked weapon. He fell heavily to his knees beside the freezing sacrificial stone. Odette lay motionless. Her pale skin was practically translucent in the dim, flickering candlelight. Her ethereal silver magic had been violently drained from her fragile veins. Her chest barely moved. The ambient temperature around her was terrifyingly low. Torsten gathered her freezing body into his trembling arms. He crushed her against his warm, scarred chest. "Odette," he pleaded. His voice was a fractured, ruined whisper. "I am here. Come back to me." Her unseeing eyes fluttered open. She searched the suffocating darkness for his familiar, blistering heat. She lifted a trembling, ice-cold hand toward his tear-stained face. Her fragile fingers brushed his rugged jaw. "Touch me one last time," she breathed. Her voice was a fading winter breeze. "My Alpha." Her delicate hand slipped from his cheek. It fell completely limp against the unforgiving stone. Chapter 7 Torsten threw his head back. A feral, catastrophic howl ripped through the subterranean chamber. It was a sound of absolute fractured devastation. He crushed her icy body against his blazing chest. She was gone. He would not allow it. He refused to exist in a world without her intoxicating scent of midnight rain. He would rather burn the afterlife to ashes than surrender his mate. Torsten laid her gently against the obsidian stone. He cradled her delicate head in his large, blood-stained hands. He tilted her pale neck, exposing the fragile, freezing skin. "I am yours," he whispered fiercely against her collarbone. "Take my life, take my soul." He sank his lethal fangs deep into her pulse point. It was the ancient death marking. He voluntarily poured the entirety of his dominant alpha life force into her drained, dying veins. Hot crimson blood mixed with her fading magic. The pain was blinding, but he welcomed the agonizing sacrifice. Suddenly, a searing colossal heat erupted between them. A blinding wave of silver and gold light exploded from their joined bodies. It violently swept through the dark catacombs. The radiant blast instantly obliterated the lingering stench of Vigo's foul magic. The ancient iron-stone curse finally shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Torsten felt a crushing weight completely vanish from his exhausted spirit. He collapsed against the cold altar. He fully expected to die in her place. Instead, a soft, trembling hand touched his cheek. Torsten gasped, his amber eyes flying open. Odette was breathing. Her skin radiated a vibrant, beautiful warmth. Slowly, her delicate eyelashes fluttered. She opened her eyes. The clouded, milky veil of Vigo's toxic poison had completely dissolved. Her irises shone with a brilliant, luminous silver. She looked at his face for the very first time. Her gaze traced his sharp jawline. She mapped the golden fire in his eyes and the brutal scar on his shoulder. Tears of pure, unadulterated joy spilled down her flushed cheeks. "My Alpha," she wept, her voice ringing clear and full of vibrant life. 6 months later, the brutal winter snow had fully melted. A prosperous, warm spring blossomed across the rebuilt kingdom of Vanneborg. Odette stood on the grand balcony of the royal palace. She was no longer a blind, terrified servant cowering in the shadows. She was the Luna Queen. She wore elegant, flowing silk that caught the morning sunlight. Her silver eyes watched over their thriving, peaceful people. Firm, commanding footsteps approached from behind. Torsten's towering frame wrapped securely around her waist. He pulled her back flush against his solid, burning chest. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her sweet lavender scent with a deep, contented rumble. He pressed a tender, possessive kiss directly over his faded, claiming mark. Odette leaned into his consuming heat, her hands resting over his. The ruthless, unfeeling tyrant had been entirely tamed. He was finally, perfectly, and eternally hers. If you believe love like this is worth the pain, subscribe for more stories that will break your heart and heal it at the same time.